my past life, my mom caused my CEO dad's car accident and death. My maternal grandparents went bankrupt and committed suicide. My uncle Kyle was framed and sent to prison. Our entire family collapsed, one by one, like it had been carefully arranged from the beginning. And I never got to be born. Just a faint consciousness, drifting beside my mom as she cried over a pillow she hugged every night, calling it her baby. Everyone called her crazy. Everyone believed the truth that was fed to them. Until I opened my eyes again. Reborn. This time, I was inside her belly. Warm. Real. Alive. And I could think. At first, I thought it was a second chance just for me. But soon, I realized something even stranger. I could hear my own thoughts. And they could be heard outside. Dad first noticed it during a hospital visit. Mom had come in again, her hand protectively over her stomach. She had a soft, slightly confused smile, like she didn't fully understand why everyone kept looking at her with suspicion. Dad stood across from her, cold and sharp. "Chloe." His voice was flat. "Are you trying to trick me with a fake pregnancy again?" Mom flinched. "What? I'm not." "This life," he cut in, eyes darkening. "I won't believe you again." His words were final, like a verdict already decided. Inside her, I froze. Fake pregnancy? Does Daddy think I don't exist? No. No, no, no. I wriggled immediately, panic flashing through my tiny body. "I'm here, Daddy. I don't know how, but I am here." I kicked as hard as I could. Mom gasped slightly, placing a hand over her stomach. Dad stopped. Just like that. His eyes narrowed. What was that? Uncle Kyle, standing beside him, frowned. What? Then. I thought again, softer this time, almost desperate. "Daddy, you're so handsome. You look strong. You can protect Mommy and me, right?" Dad went completely still. His expression shifted. Not disbelief. Not anger. Confusion. "I heard something," he said slowly. Kyle scoffed. "Heard what?" Dad didn't answer. Because I kicked again. Harder. Like I was trying to prove I was real. And something about the way his gaze dropped to Mom's belly changed. For the first time, doubt entered his eyes. From the side, a woman stepped forward. Vivian. Her voice was sweet, but sharp underneath. "Ethan, she's done this before. Fake pregnancy, fake pity. In the past life you even saw it yourself." Dad's jaw tightened slightly. Kyle nodded. "She's dangerous. Don't fall for it again." Mom looked between them, confused. I don't understand what you're talking about. I really am pregnant." But no one was listening to her. Not really. Because I was still thinking. And apparently they could still hear me. That bad woman is lying again. I kicked. In the past life, Mommy was pregnant with me. But someone pushed her down the stairs. I felt a strange sting inside my tiny chest. And I was gone. Just a ghost. Watching her hold a pillow. Singing lullabies to something that wasn't there anymore. "Mommy, I'm back." I struggled harder inside her, like my tiny body remembered pain it had never truly lived. I rubbed against the womb, desperate, like a kitten trying to be seen. "Don't be scared. This time I'll protect you. I want to see this world. I want to see Daddy. I want to see Mommy smile for real." Suddenly, "Shut up." Dad's voice snapped sharply. Everyone froze. His hands pressed against his head for a second. "Stop talking." Kyle blinked. "What are you talking about?" Dad's eyes were fixed on Mom's stomach now, sharp, unsettled. "Something is in there." Vivian's expression tightened for a split second. Then she smiled again. "Ethan, you're overthinking. Stress can make you hallucinate things." But Dad didn't relax. Not anymore. Because I kicked again. Softly this time. Almost shy. "Oh no. So many people are staring. I'm shy." Dad's breath caught. Kyle's posture stiffened. Even Grandpa Richard and Grandma Eleanor, who had just entered the room, suddenly went quiet. The atmosphere changed. From suspicion to something heavier. Uncertain. Uneasy. Mom touched her belly gently. "Baby, are you okay?" I felt her warmth and calmed a little. "Yes, Mommy. I'm okay." But outside, everything was not. Because Dad suddenly spoke again. "Doctor," he said coldly, "I want a full prenatal examination." Now. Vivian immediately stepped forward. Ethan, that's unnecessary. You already had her checked before. I said now. His voice left no room for argument. Minutes later, under cold hospital lights, Mom lay on the examination bed. Gel was applied to her stomach. I wriggled at the strange sensation. Wow. Cold, slippery. Like jelly. Are they looking for me? Daddy, I'm here. Look carefully. Dad stood at the side, unmoving. Kyle beside him. Grandpa and Grandma behind them. Even Vivian watching quietly. The room felt crowded. Too many eyes. I became shy again and curled inward. But then, a sound filled the room. Thump, thump, thump. The ultrasound machine picked it up clearly. The doctor leaned forward slightly. There's fetal heartbeat activity. Dad's expression changed instantly. Kyle stepped closer. Grandpa Richard stiffened. Grandma Eleanor covered her mouth. On the screen, a small shape appeared. Tiny. Alive. Moving. The doctor adjusted the probe. 14 weeks. Fetal heartbeat is strong and normal. Silence. Absolute silence. Mom blinked. So, I really am pregnant. No one answered her. Because they were all looking at the screen. At me. And for the first time, Dad didn't look angry. He looked uncertain. Like something he had already condemned had just refused to disappear. Vivian's face darkened slightly. That's impossible, she said quickly. In the past life I kicked again. Suddenly irritated. This didn't happen in the past life. Why are there bad guys suddenly coming to bully Daddy and Uncle Kyle? The air in the hospital corridor shifted. That laugh didn't belong here. It didn't belong anywhere near white walls, sterile lights, or the quiet rhythm of medical machines. It felt like something dragged in from another place. Something that had learned how to smile in the middle of violence. Downstairs, chaos tightened into a single point. Footsteps grew louder. Closer. Coordinated. Not random panic. Not a confused patient or a drunk intruder. This was organized. I felt it through Mom's body before I could understand it fully. Her heartbeat spiking, her breath catching mid-inhale. Ethan, Dad said sharply, his voice changing in an instant. All the uncertainty from before vanished, replaced by something colder. Alert. Protective. Get behind me. Kyle didn't argue. His chair scraped hard as he stood. Grandpa Richard stepped forward too, slower but heavier, like a door locking into place. Even Grandma Eleanor's trembling hand dropped from her mouth, her eyes narrowing with sudden focus. But Mom was still lying there, still connected to wires and monitors, still the center of something she didn't understand. And I didn't like this. My tiny body tensed again, instinct screaming louder than thought. Danger, danger, danger. Outside, the footsteps stopped, right below us. Then, the hospital doors at the end of the corridor banged open so hard the sound echoed up the stairwell. Shouting erupted. A nurse screamed something incomprehensible. Something crashed. Then silence. A controlled silence. Like the world had been grabbed by the throat. And then that voice returned. Closer now. Ethan. It called again, almost cheerful. You always did like hospitals. Easy targets. No escape routes. Very predictable. Dad didn't move. But I felt it, his body tightening like a drawn wire. Kyle's voice came low. You know him. A pause. Dad didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. The footsteps resumed. Slow now. Deliberate. Each step landing like it owned the building. I tried to move inside Mom, tried to kick again, but something about the air felt heavier. Not physical. Not real. Something like pressure pressing down on thought itself. Like the room was remembering a future where we already lost. Then I saw him. Through the doorway at the far end of the corridor. A man in a dark coat, too clean for someone who had just broken into a hospital. Smiling. Not rushed. Not breathless. Like he had planned this visit. Behind him, shadows moved. Other figures less distinct, spreading into the hallway like ink in water. He tilted his head slightly when he saw Dad. Still alive, he said lightly. That's impressive. In the last timeline, you died here. Silence snapped shut again. Mom's hand twitched. Dad's eyes narrowed. What did you say? The man's smile widened. Oh, he said, almost amused. You haven't figured it out yet. He raised a hand casually, as if greeting old friends. I've come to correct a mistake. My tiny body jolted again. Not fear this time. Recognition. That word. Timeline. It didn't belong in this world either. And for the first time since I became aware of myself inside this womb, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just danger coming from my father. This was something that had already killed us once before. Dad didn't move, but the air around him changed. It wasn't visible, no light, no glow, no dramatic effect, but it was unmistakable. The kind of stillness that forms right before something breaks. Kyle noticed it too. His voice dropped. Dad, don't. The man in the doorway laughed softly again, like he'd heard something amusing. Don't what? He asked. React? Think? Remember? His gaze drifted lazily across the room. Grandpa Richard, Grandma Eleanor, Kyle, before settling back on Dad. You've always had this problem, Ethan. You resist even when you already know how it ends. One of the shadowed figures behind him stepped forward. A nurse was dragged out of the corridor, struggling, but there was no panic in the attacker's movements. Only efficiency. Grandma Eleanor gasped. Grandpa Richard moved half a step forward. Dad raised a hand. One stop. Not loud. Not dramatic. But absolute. Everyone froze. Even Kyle. Dad finally spoke, voice low. This isn't a robbery. The man tilted his head. No. A pause. Then. It's cleanup. My tiny body reacted before I understood the word. Cleanup. Something about it felt wrong in a deeper way than danger. Not just harm, erasure. Like someone was deciding what should and shouldn't exist. Mom's breathing quickened. What is he talking about? No one answered her. Because Dad was staring at the man like he was trying to place a memory that refused to surface. You're not supposed to be here, Dad said quietly. The man's smile sharpened. Oh, I am exactly where I'm supposed to be, he replied. You just didn't survive long enough last time to stop it from happening properly. Kyle's eyes flicked between them. Dad, what is he talking about? Last time? Timeline? The man sighed as if bored, then raised a hand slightly. One of the shadows behind him flicked its wrist. Instantly, the lights in the corridor stuttered. Every monitor in the room beeped once at the same time. Mom's heartbeat monitor spiked. And I felt it. A pressure drop in reality itself. Like the world had been briefly unstitched. Dad reacted instantly. He stepped between Mom's bed and the doorway. Fully now. Protecting. Not hesitating anymore. I don't care what you think you know, Dad said. You don't come into a hospital and start taking people. The man's eyes gleamed faintly. That's the difference between you and me, he said. I don't think I know. He tapped his temple. I remember. Silence. Even the shadows seemed to pause at that. Then he looked directly at Dad again. You died here, Ethan, he said softly. Right on this floor. You tried to save her. His gaze shifted briefly to Mom. And you failed. Something in the room cracked. Not physically. Emotionally. Mom flinched. No, that's not. Dad's expression didn't change. But his hand tightened. Kyle saw it. Grandpa Richard saw it too. Even the man noticed. And he smiled wider. There it is, he whispered. That look. The moment you remember just enough to start making the same mistakes again. My tiny body suddenly kicked hard. Not fear now. Anger. Stop talking. Stop talking about them like they're already gone. Mom gasped softly at the kick. Hand instinctively going to her stomach. For a fraction of a second, everyone in the room noticed me again. Alive. Present. Real. Even the man's gaze shifted slightly. Oh, he said. A pause. Then quieter. So that's new. The hallway lights flickered again. And for the first time since he arrived, his smile didn't look quite as certain. The man's smile didn't disappear. But it changed. Less effortless now. More measured. Like he was recalculating something that didn't match his memory. He took one slow step forward into the corridor. And the shadows behind him followed. Not rushing. Not attacking yet. Just waiting. Dad didn't move from Mom's bedside, but I could feel the shift in him. Something had locked into place inside his mind, something sharp and final. You remember? Dad said quietly. It wasn't a question. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. I remember enough, he replied. Enough to know how this ends. Kyle looked between them, voice tense. Dad, what is he talking about? You died here? What does that even mean? No one answered him immediately, because the answer didn't feel like something you say. It felt like something that already happened. Grandpa Richard stepped forward, voice rough. Ethan, if this is true. It's not. Dad cut in immediately. Too fast. Too controlled. That alone made the room colder. Mom shifted slightly in the bed. Ethan? Her voice was small, uncertain, anchored to nothing in this storm of half-truths and impossible words. Dad softened just a fraction when he looked at her. Stay still, he said. Just stay still. But I could feel it through her body. She was scared. Not just of the man. Of the fact that everyone in the room was standing on something unstable. Like the floor itself might give way at any moment. The man tilted his head again, watching Dad. You're protecting her the same way you did before, he said. That didn't work last time either. Dad's jaw tightened. That version of me isn't here. A quiet beat. Then the man laughed softly. Oh, he said. But you are. He raised a hand slightly, and the shadows behind him shifted closer to the doorway. Not entering yet. Just narrowing the space. Like a closing circle. The monitors beeped again. Once. Twice. Mom's heartbeat spiked. And I felt it. A pull. Something trying to force the moment forward. Like the world wanted this scene to reach its ending faster than we could resist it. I kicked again hard. Mom gasped, hand flying to her stomach. It moved again. For the first time, even the man looked directly at me without amusement. Not curiosity. Not mockery. Assessment. That shouldn't be reacting like that, he murmured. Dad noticed that. Instantly. His eyes flicked to Mom's stomach. Then back to the man. Slowly. Carefully. You're not here for me, Dad said. A pause. The man didn't answer right away. And that silence said more than anything else. Dad exhaled once. I see it now, he said quietly. Kyle stiffened. See what? Dad didn't look at him. Didn't look away from the man either. But his voice dropped lower. This isn't an attack, he said. It's a correction. The man smiled again, but it wasn't as clean anymore. Finally, he said. You're catching up. The hallway lights flickered harder. Further down the corridor, alarms began to sound, but they sounded distant, delayed, like the hospital itself was struggling to decide whether to respond. Grandpa Richard took a step back without realizing it. Kyle's breathing quickened. Dad, what do we do? Dad's answer was immediate. Get her out. Mom froze. Ethan, what? But Dad was already moving. Not toward the man. Not toward the shadows. Toward Mom. He leaned down, cutting through wires and cords with controlled urgency. The man's voice sharpened slightly. You can't move her. Dad didn't look up. Watch me. A flicker in the air. The shadows tensed. And for the first time, the man's calm started to crack just enough to show something underneath. Not anger. Concern. Because something in this version of events wasn't matching what he remembered. And somewhere deep inside Mom's body, inside me, I felt it too. The story wasn't ending the way it was supposed to. It was being rewritten in real time. And we were running out of pages. The corridor held its breath. Then everything started moving at once. Dad didn't hesitate anymore. Whatever doubts had been circling him before were gone now. Burned off by recognition, or fear, or something heavier he refused to name. Kyle, he snapped. Now. Kyle reacted instantly, moving to Mom's side to help adjust the bed. Machines protested with sharp beeps as cables were detached one by one. Grandpa Richard stepped in without being asked, blocking the corridor line of sight with his body. Grandma Eleanor grabbed what she could, bags, documents, anything tied to Mom's stay. Hands shaking but steadying as she moved. The man in the doorway watched it all without rushing to stop them. That was what made it worse. He let it happen. You're changing the sequence, he said quietly, almost amused again, but thinner now. That's inconvenient. Dad lifted Mom carefully, supporting her as much as the situation allowed. We're leaving. The man's gaze followed them. You think moving her changes what she is? Dad didn't answer, because answering would mean acknowledging him. And Dad had already decided not to give him that. The shadows behind the man shifted forward a fraction, then stopped, like they were waiting on permission that wasn't coming. The man clicked his tongue softly. No, he said at last. You're not supposed to do that yet. A flicker of pressure hit the room again, like the world trying to correct itself. Lights stuttered. Monitors shrieked. Mom gasped, clutching her stomach instinctively as another strong kick hit from inside me. I didn't know why I did it. I just did. The man's eyes snapped toward me again. This time the smile was gone. That interference is getting worse, he murmured. Dad caught that. And for the first time he looked directly at the man like he finally understood the real target. You're not here for her, Dad said again, but different now. Certain. You're here for what's inside her. Silence. Even Kyle froze at that. Even the shadows hesitated. The man exhaled slowly through his nose. So you do remember more than expected, he said. Dad tightened his grip on Mom. Get out of my hospital. The man tilted his head. Something in his expression shifted, like a file being closed. This isn't your hospital, he said quietly. Not in any version that matters. Then he took a step back, not retreating in defeat, but recalibrating. Fine, he added. We'll adjust. The shadows behind him began to dissolve. Not vanishing, but withdrawing, folding back into him like ink being pulled into a pen. Kyle stared. He's leaving? Grandpa Richard frowned. That's not a withdrawal. That's a reset. The man looked once more at Dad. Ethan, he said almost gently now. This time, you're earlier than you were before. That changes things. A pause. Then. But it doesn't change the outcome. And with that he turned. Walked away. The shadows followed. No explosion. No dramatic final clash. Just absence returning to fill the space they had occupied. Until the corridor was empty again. Too empty. The alarm slowly quieted. The lights steadied. The hospital began pretending nothing had happened at all. But nobody in that room believed it. Mom was carefully set down again, breathing uneven but alive. Kyle stood frozen for a moment, then finally exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. Grandpa Richard spoke first, voice low. That man, he wasn't human. Dad didn't respond immediately. He was staring at Mom. Or more specifically, at me. His expression wasn't fear anymore. It was understanding turning into something heavier. Responsibility. I know what this is now, he said quietly. Mom looked at him. Ethan, what is going on? Dad hesitated. Just for a second. Then. You're not safe, he said simply. Not here. Not anymore. Kyle stepped closer. So what do we do? Dad looked at all of them. Then at the door the man had used. Then back at Mom. And finally. I fix it, he said. A long silence followed. Because that didn't sound like a plan. It sounded like the beginning of something worse. And inside Mom's stomach, I went still. For the first time since I became aware of myself, I understood the shape of the ending forming around us. Not peace. Not victory. A decision. And whatever Dad chose next, would decide what version of this world survived to see tomorrow. The hospital fell into an uneasy quiet. Not peace, just the absence of immediate violence. The kind of silence that only exists after something has decided to leave. Not because it was defeated, but because it was done observing. Mom lay back on the bed again, breathing uneven but stable. The monitors had stopped screaming. They were only watching now, quietly insisting she was still alive, still within the system. But nothing in the room felt normal anymore. Dad stood beside her, one hand still resting near her shoulder, like he was anchoring her to reality itself. Kyle finally broke the silence. So, he just leaves? That's it. No one answered immediately. Because everyone felt the same thing underneath it all. This wasn't over. It had only paused. Grandpa Richard slowly lowered himself into a chair, suddenly looking older than he had an hour ago. Grandma Eleanor sat beside him without speaking, her hands folded too tightly in her lap. Kyle ran a hand through his hair. He said timeline. He said Ethan died here. None of that makes sense. Dad finally exhaled. Long. Controlled. Like he had been holding that breath across 2 different lives. It makes sense, Dad said quietly. That alone made everyone look at him. Even Mom. Even me. He didn't meet their eyes at first. Instead, he stared at the doorway where the man had been standing. Like he could still see the shape of him burned into the air. I just didn't want it to, Dad added. Silence again. This time heavier. Mom shifted slightly. Ethan, what are you saying? Dad turned to her now, and something in his expression softened, but only for her. You asked me once, he said, voice low. Why I never wanted children yet. Mom blinked slowly. What? Kyle frowned. Dad. But Dad raised a hand slightly, not to silence them, to steady himself. I didn't answer, he said, because I didn't know how to explain something I only remembered in pieces. His eyes flickered, just briefly, to my presence inside her. I've been here before. That sentence landed like a dropped object in a still room. Grandpa Richard straightened slightly. Ethan, that's not possible. Dad didn't argue. That man was right about one thing, Dad continued. I died here, on this floor, trying to stop exactly what just walked away. Mom's face went pale. You're serious? Dad nodded once. Slowly. It wasn't supposed to happen that way, he said. Not originally. Not in the version I remember first. Kyle's voice dropped. What version? Dad finally looked at him. And there was something exhausted in his eyes now. Not fear. Not panic. Recognition. There were more than one, he said. More than one outcome. More than one ending. A pause. Then. And in most of them, she doesn't survive. Mom went completely still. Not even her breathing changed for a second. Kyle whispered, Mom? Dad shook his head slightly. Not just her. His gaze dropped again. To her stomach. To me. The room tightened. Even the machines seemed quieter, like they didn't want to interrupt. The thing inside her, Dad said carefully, isn't normal development. Mom flinched. Ethan, that's our child. I know, Dad said immediately. Faster than anything else he'd said. Then softer. I know. But his eyes didn't change. Because knowing didn't cancel out the other truth forming behind it. The man hadn't come for chaos. He had come for correction. And Dad was remembering enough now to understand what that meant. Kyle swallowed hard. So what are you saying? That guy was trying to kill the baby. Dad hesitated. That hesitation was the answer. Grandpa Richard stood slowly again. Then we call the police. We lock this place down. No, Dad cut in. Quiet. Final. That stopped everything. Dad stepped away from the bed now, just slightly, like he needed distance to think clearly. They won't help, he said. They never did before. Mom's voice trembled. Ethan, what are we supposed to do then? Dad looked at her. And for the first time, there was something like acceptance in his expression. Not surrender. Decision. We leave the system, he said. Kyle frowned. What system? Dad didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper. Old. Not from this hospital. Not from this timeline. He placed it gently on the bed beside Mom. Kyle leaned closer. What is that? Dad exhaled. My insurance card, he said quietly. A beat. Then almost bitterly. It was in my pocket the day I died here. Silence snapped tight again. Mom stared at it. Then at him. You kept that from another life? She whispered. Dad nodded once. I didn't know why, he said. Until now. He looked at the door again. Where the man had been. Because something always brings us back here, he said. Same place. Same moment. Different version of the ending. A pause. Then softer. And this. It brought us here early. Kyle stepped closer. So what do we do with that? Dad finally turned fully toward them. All of them. Mom. Kyle. Grandpa. Grandma. Even the unborn presence inside the room. and his voice steadied into something final. We changed the ending, he said. Not loud, not dramatic, just certain. Because now everything had converged. The past he didn't want to remember. The man who remembered too much. The timeline that kept repeating. And the life inside Mom that didn't belong in any of them cleanly. Outside the hospital windows, distant sirens began to fade again. Like the world was resetting its attention elsewhere. But inside this room, nothing reset. Only one thing remained clear. The story wasn't looping anymore. It was diverging. And for the first time, Dad was going to choose which version survived. Dad didn't sleep that night. None of them did. The hospital tried to return to normal around them. Shift changes, quiet announcements, distant wheels of carts rolling through clean corridors. But it all felt staged now. Like a play continuing after the audience had realized the stage was cracking underneath it. By morning, Dad had already made arrangements. No explanations given to staff beyond what was necessary. No arguments. No delays. Just quiet authority and documents signed too quickly to question. Kyle helped without asking anymore. Grandpa Richard stopped trying to challenge what he couldn't understand, and simply followed. Grandma Eleanor stayed by Mom's side the entire time, as if proximity alone could keep reality from shifting again. And Mom watched all of it with a silence that wasn't confusion anymore. It was acceptance forming too early, too heavy. Like she could feel something approaching even without being told. I felt it too, but I didn't understand it the way they did. Only that everything was moving, and nothing was stopping. They left before sunset. Not in an ambulance. Not under emergency escort. Just a private vehicle, moving quietly through roads that looked too ordinary for what was happening inside it. Dad sat in the front, eyes constantly scanning mirrors that showed nothing following them, but he didn't trust that. Kyle sat in the back, tense, constantly checking Mom's breathing. Grandpa Richard drove part of the way in silence, then switched with Kyle when his hands started shaking. Grandma Eleanor held Mom's hand the entire time. Mom leaned back, exhausted, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. Over me. I didn't move much anymore. Not because I couldn't, but because something in the world felt thin. Like movement might draw attention again. Like hearing me was enough for something to come back. Dad noticed it too. Every few minutes, his eyes would flick to Mom. To the space between life and whatever I was becoming. Like he was counting something only he could see. They didn't go home. Not really. They went somewhere hidden. A place Dad had prepared without telling anyone. Far from the city, far from hospitals, far from the places where systems existed. A house that looked ordinary on the outside, but felt wrong in its stillness. Like it had been waiting. That night, everything finally stopped pretending. Mom lay in a dim room. No machines. No monitors. Just breathing. Just silence. Kyle stood near the window. Grandpa Richard stayed near the door. Grandma Eleanor hummed softly under her breath, like she was trying to keep reality anchored through sound alone. And Dad stood at the edge of the room, staring at Mom like he was deciding whether to speak or act. Finally, Mom broke first. "Ethan," she whispered, "tell me the truth." Dad didn't answer immediately. Then he walked to her, sat beside her. And for the first time since it began, his voice wasn't controlled. It was honest. "I died here once," he said. Mom didn't flinch anymore. She just listened. "And in that version," he continued, "you died too." A long pause. "But not like this," he added. "Not peacefully. Not naturally. It was arranged." Kyle stiffened. Grandpa Richard swore under his breath. Mom closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, she asked the only question that mattered. "By who?" Dad looked down, then answered. "I don't know his name," he said. "But I know what he is." A pause. Then, "He doesn't see people as lives. He sees them as outcomes." Silence filled the room. Even the house outside felt quieter. Mom's hand tightened slightly over her stomach. "I can feel it," she whispered. Dad nodded. "I know," he said. Because now he could too. Not just memory. Not just fear. But pattern. A design that kept repeating. And at the center of it, me. Outside, the wind shifted against the windows. Not strong. Not violent. Just present. Like something had arrived and was choosing not to knock yet. Dad stood again. This time he walked to the center of the room. Not toward the door. Not toward escape. Toward decision. I won't let it happen again, he said quietly. Kyle looked at him. And how do you stop someone who can reset time? Dad didn't answer immediately. Then he looked at Mom. At me. And something finally clicked into place. Not hope. Not desperation. Clarity. You don't fight the loop, Dad said. You remove what anchors it. Mom's voice trembled. And what's that? Dad held her gaze. Softly. The beginning. A beat. Then realization spread through the room in different ways. Grandpa Richard shook his head. Ethan, no. Kyle stepped forward. Dad, that's not. But Dad didn't look away from Mom. I already lost you once, he said quietly. I won't repeat the version where I lose you in pieces again. Mom's eyes filled, but she didn't move away. Because she understood now. Not everything. But enough. And the baby, she whispered. That question broke the last layer of silence. Dad hesitated. For the first time, truly hesitated. Then he spoke. I don't think it's supposed to exist in any stable version of this world, he said. That's why he came. A long pause. Then softer. But it does exist. Here. Now. And inside me. I felt it. The weight of being something that shouldn't be here. Something that changed outcomes just by existing. Something that made timelines unstable. Something worth erasing to someone who only cared about clean endings. Mom's hand tightened over her stomach again. Protective. Defiant. No, she said quietly. One word. But absolute. Dad closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, something in him had changed. I know, he said. Then he stood, walked to the door, and opened it. The wind outside was colder than it should have been. The yard was empty, but Dad didn't look at the empty space. He looked beyond it, like he could feel something waiting just out of sight again. This is the only version where I get to choose, he said quietly. No one answered, because there was nothing left to argue. Only what came next. Dad turned back once, looked at Mom, at Kyle, at Grandpa Richard and Grandma Eleanor, at everything that still existed because it hadn't been taken yet. Then he said the final truth of it all. If I'm wrong, he said, everything ends anyway. A pause. Then softer. But if I'm right, this is the only chance we get. And he stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Inside the room, silence returned. Mom held her stomach. Kyle stood frozen. Grandpa Richard lowered his head. Grandma Eleanor whispered a prayer no one corrected. And I felt something shift. Not fear. Not anger. Something closer to awareness expanding too fast. Because outside that door, Dad was no longer just a man remembering another life. He was becoming the thing that decided which life continued. And somewhere far away, in a place that didn't belong to any single timeline, someone finally noticed that the anchor had moved, and everything began to fracture. The ending wasn't peaceful. It wasn't tragic. It wasn't even finished. It was suspended, like a breath held between worlds. And in that suspended moment, I understood what I was. Not just a child. Not just a mistake in time. But the reason everything was still happening at all.